Good evening, everybody. I'm Katrina Railton, and I'm the president of SPAC Junior Committee. We're excited to have you all join us tonight for a discussion with Lynn Trizna, who's the executive director of Pitney, Meadows Community Farm, and Michele Drozd, the co-founder of Craigardan. Just a few things before we start. Make sure you guys are all on mute while we're having our discussion. And if you want, please put on your camera so we can see your smiling faces. One of the things I do want to just give a big shout out, we have throughout this is our third series, and this event actually has raised about $400 for this event alone, in which the junior committee is going to be matching these funds for about $1,000 there. And just want to give a shout out to Kim Klopstock and Lily in the Rose. If you got any food from her, make sure you tag her on Instagram. With the hashtag creating during COVID and tagging SPAC Saratoga and Lily in the Rose with that and SPAC Junior Committee. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Elizabeth, who will start a discussion.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to see you guys tonight. It's a really special evening to be joined by these two amazing women. But I hope you will allow me a slight diversion before we go and to just say that thanks to an unbelievably amazing SPAC staff, today we announced the return of New York City Ballet to SPAC this summer, albeit in a small form, but today was a rather miraculous day for us. And I just want to acknowledge all the incredible work that so many people have done to bring us back together. Want to thank Katrina and Junior Committee and Heather and all the SPAC colleagues who make all this possible. So before I introduce our guests, I also want to make a shout out to someone who is a friend, a muse, an inspiration, and Kim Klopstock, who Katrina mentioned, is just one of the most inspiring women I know. She is a chef, but she's also a major member of this community. She brings people together, whether it's farmers, chefs, friends, creators, and she is the one who's really kind of lit up this inspiration to create culinary arts at SPAC and to bring people together through food and community and farming and gardening. So speaking of that, you know, we've all thought a lot about COVID, and over the last 13 months, we've been struggling to reestablish connections with people. I think if there's one big silver lining of COVID, it's that it reminded us how much we need other people, whether it's in a family setting, a community setting, communally enjoying art, nature, food, passing down recipes, whatever it is, we need each other. And in a time when there's so much divisiveness, these connections around food and art and nature are the things that remind us of our own humanity and also remind us of the humanity in others. And so I am so thrilled to be joined by Lynn Trizna and Michele Drozd, because the work they are doing is just spectacular in these areas. So I'm just gonna like give a tiny little bio intro to both of them first before we start the conversation, and obviously you'll be able to access their full bios and organizational info. We'll be sending links to that. Lynn, I met this year thanks to Barbara Glazer and her leadership at Pitney Meadows. She introduced me to Lynn during COVID. And immediately I knew I was in the presence of a powerhouse who was going to bring so many amazing things to Saratoga. I can't begin to say how much the presence of Pitney Farm in this community means to me personally, that this is a city that has embraced the importance of a community farm within its city limits. And what Pitney has been able to do during COVID has been really exceptional. So Lynn, just briefly, this is not her full bio, just a little taste of an intro, has a passion for preserving farmland, strengthening local farms, and inspiring communities to grow their own food. Lynn comes to Pitney from the Rodale Institute, considered the birthplace of the organic farming movement. The Pennsylvania Institute has been a global leader in regenerative organic agriculture for over 70 years. At Rodale, Lynn launched an innovative farm to hospital model in 2014 that has raised community awareness about healthy eating and produced thousands of pounds of high quality organic vegetables and fruits. So that's just a little taste. And then Michele, I got to know Michele thanks to Lynn, and these circles are just so beautiful, the way one connects to the other. So Michele has a Bachelor of Fine Arts in ceramics, and she spent 6 years producing sculptural and architectural tile, traveling the world and finally finding her home in the Adirondack Mountains of New York State. Her intense interest in entrepreneurialism, the revitalization of small rural towns, food and agriculture, art, education, and historic preservation, and the connections between all of those things led her to co-found Craigardan. And so, wow, what a confluence of things that resonate for us all. And so before just kind of kicking it off with Michele, I just had to read you the mission statement for Craigardan when Lynn told me about Craigardan and Michele, and I went to the website and it just kind of blew me away. Located in the heart of the Adirondacks, Craigardan is a not-for-profit arts organization with a mission to encourage the human imagination, to interpret the world with philosophical, ecological, and artistic perspectives. To fulfill our mission, Craigardan supports artists, chefs, craftspeople, farmers, scholars, and writers through residencies, social justice initiatives, and other programs. And so that just so resonated with me about what we're all trying to do to serve artists and art and the community through every way imaginable, particularly as we try to repair the suffering and the damage that has been done through COVID. So I'm going to start with Michele. Michele, let's talk to us about like the inspiration for Craigardan. What the heck led you to do this amazing thing up in the Adirondacks?
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's a really big question, and I'm going to spare all of you the long story. And I'll just say that, from your introduction, I think most people can understand that our core focus here is really about interdisciplinarity and how important it is for each of us to break free of sort of these silos that we find ourselves in and that we put ourselves in, and understand what it is beyond multiple disciplines, but to really be interdisciplinary in our thinking, in our problem solving, in our creative processes, to kind of unlock potential within ourselves, within our creative communities, within our local regions. And for us, it's really about that unlocking that sort of using the creative process, using collective creativity to help make social change, help make positive change in our communities. What led me to really think about that big picture was that I was a working artist, that I did have this background working for a number of nonprofits here in the Adirondacks, and my interests around environmental conservation, architectural preservation, each of these organizations tend to work in their silos. And as an artist, you are someone who's looking for ways to connect and ways to see where there are possibilities, see the spaces between the trees, and also understand what new potential can come from creating partnerships and collaborating, across sometimes seemingly disparate disciplines. And so in creating Craigardan, I wanted to create a safe space for people of all disciplines, scholars, farmers, chefs, artists, craftspeople, to come together and not only do their own work, but to really be encouraged to learn from each other, to share knowledge, and to actually, think about new ways of working and collaborating, and then problem solving out in the world because of their experience here in a very place-based environment.
And
That's in a
can you
nutshell.
talk about the place-based? Because I mean, you are actually a farm. Like, just tell us what the artist's experience is when they come to Craigardan for a residency. What are they doing and what are they seeing?
Sure. I know place-based is sort of becoming a little bit of a buzzword. When I was first thinking about how to describe what we do, it fit perfectly. So on a very focus level, we are a working farm. We are diversified as much as possible. We're interested in producing our own food here for all of our program participants, but also for the local community. We're interested in using the farm as an agricultural model for opening the conversation up to different topics. Food and farming, as you know, is an amazing common denominator that brings people together. And it also engages them in nature in new and different ways. But place-based also means that we're constantly trying to learn, understand some larger context within which we're located and also within which we're working. So we're here in the Elizabethtown area of the Adirondacks, sort of in the heart of the High Peaks region. And there's a lot of history here. There's a lot of history around the arts. There's a lot of history around environmental conservation. We're kind of at the nexus between this amazing, state resource and the resurgence of small farms in the Champlain Valley. And young people looking to become first generation farmers and looking to think about a new way of being in touch with the world and their food and the land around them. And so thinking about that larger context, and then also where do we sit within the greater Northeast? Where do we sit within the history of makers and artists in the United States and globally? We bring artists and scholars from around the world to come here to be embedded, not just immersed, but embedded in the Adirondacks for a period of time to really understand this space and allow it to affect them and influence their work. And hopefully they leave their mark on us as well.
That's really wonderful. I mean, I have to say, like, I felt very privileged to be included in your annual feedback summit this year. And for those of you who aren't aware of the Feedback Summit, it's really addressing issues. Well, this year with a real emphasis on food inequality and everything, but there were so many amazing artists who are focusing their artistic expressions on these sort of issues of crisis in community and the way they were addressing what's happening to the earth, what's happening in society through art was incredibly inspiring. So for those of you who are not familiar with Craigardan, like, definitely check them out. Watch for the next Feedback Summit. So it was a really very, very inspiring event. Lynn, let's jump to you for a sec. I mean, first of all, Pitney Farm, amazing. There's also, like, obviously SPAC and Pitney Farm already have a working relationship around collaboration, and the wonderful word coined by Barbara Glazer, articulture, has been kind of like hovering over there, like our inspirational word. So we can talk about that later on, but like, I want to hear more about your background. It's such an interesting background, and what brought you to Saratoga, and what are those things that drive you to do good in the world through the earth and farming.
Yeah, so I think that, like, the kind of short of version of the story is I was just blown away and so impressed that a community decided to invest in open space and farmland. I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and just as a kid was a little bit devastated that all the farms were being developed. So that was just something that, I'd been in production agriculture for a while, and really felt like I had this little secret and this knowledge that I wanted to share. And so that's where that community aspect of Pitney Meadows is people are welcome on the farm, dawn to dusk, 7 days a week, whatever we're doing. Education touches everything. That was so appealing to me because I had spent 13 years in production agriculture where I wanted that community interaction, but it was at the cost of production and that constant drive to move forward and produce. because one conversation we had was, I love when artists can come onto a farm, like a photographer, they capture the farm in a way that I just don't see because I don't pause and look up. So I think that being able to share that farm space and have people enjoy it, in addition to that work of production and feeding our community, really spoke to me. And so, I felt like in my career, I'd been doing production agriculture for a long time, but wanted to share it with people, share the knowledge, and welcome people onto a farm versus just boxing up the produce and sending it on its way. Like I was just craving that interaction, because I think that as a farmer, you can feel pretty isolated. So having a farm where we can welcome people on, and we have a UPIC CSA. So the people we're feeding are literally coming into the farm, meeting our farmer, learning how to pick their own produce. And that just, like, when I had read about it, I was like, wait, so how does this actually work? But it does. It works great. People love the CSA. They love coming onto the farm, asking questions and having that interaction. So that's really what drew me to the community. I mean, there's lots of reasons, but that interaction, that community support really spoke to me and caused me to just come during COVID. So
I love that. I mean, so many of us have been drawn to Saratoga by this just incredibly unique confluence of a kind of ethos here. I want to talk a little bit with both of you about ethos, and clearly during COVID, we've all been seeking connection. I mean, that's kind of the through line of, like, how do you connect when you're in isolation? And what are the things that do connect us so deeply? Obviously, family, community, art, food, and nature. I mean, these are the things that we all think about as our kind of default systems when we're missing that connection to other human beings. And it's one of the sort of cliches of COVID was how we all went food crazy, and we were like, those of us who like hadn't baked a loaf of bread in 30 years were going back to sourdough, and where can I take that online course about fermentation and all that kind of stuff. And so I'd love for both of you to talk about what you think it is in the human soul that was like looking for that connect. Like, food is the most element. I mean, other than the air we breathe, let's face it, it's the food we eat that really connects us all. And then we can kind of layer on an appreciation of nature and art and this sort of, other, more ethereal aspects of the human spirit. But Michele, you want to dive into that one about just food and getting back to the earth and why we needed it during COVID?
It's so true. And it's interesting because we're sitting here today at April 20th. It's all, it's like a year marker of when we really entered into this thing. And for me, the marker is lambing season. Last year, I'm still in lambing season right now. We have a small herd of tuna sheep. I'm also the farm manager here. And last year at this time, we entered our first lockdown, or maybe I don't even remember where we were in the lockdown period this time last year. But I would come to the farm every day and spend time with the pregnant ewes and, assist if necessary in the lambing process, and, encouraging these little creatures to come into the world in a safe way. And I was so grateful for that task. I was so grateful for that part of my job. I'm sure Lynn can, agree with me on this. It's, there's something that is so beyond therapeutic. It's not therapeutic. It's life-giving. It's human. It's natural, to just be a part of the processes, whether you're growing vegetables or, caring for animals in a very intimate way. That really got me personally, through that first stage, and continues to carry me through this whole period. And that's just my hands-on farm work. And I think, that connection, that deep connection with what is so fundamental to who we are as humans, like you're saying, Elizabeth, it's if you have soil outside of your door, everyone had this urge to get their hands in the soil. And so having a place like Pitney Meadow, or having a place like Craigardan where people can go to and learn and be present and experience that, I mean, there's no better thing, you know, for us to be able to provide that experience for people, there's no better thing. And then of course, you know, the natural evolution of that is food. And food is this amazing art form where you're mixing nature and art, you know, and then you get to like eat it. It's incredible. So for me, it just makes total sense. You know, and then for us personally, then you start to move into questions around equity and access and justice. And so you were talking a lot about, you know, our food systems work. And for me, that's where I naturally go next. And that's how I met Lynn, which is awesome. You know, we are working together on developing we were working on a working group, right? We've been doing a lot of work around developing a food policy council for the region with a lot of really incredible people. And, you know, I met Lynn through our food systems work and through the Food Justice Summit. And so, you know, I feel like that's the one missing piece of your question is we definitely realized we had to take care of ourselves and we wanted to get creative in that space with farming and food. But I think people also, as the year went on, started to really have a drive and an urge to do something and to start to take care of each other. You know, we couldn't be with each other. So there was this need to really actually care for each other, care for our communities, and make the world around us a better place.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And you're absolutely right. I think that, like, you know, again, like what I feel so privileged to be with you guys in particular, because, you know, you get so caught up, like obviously it's back, you know, you get so caught up about, you know, like what's going to be on the amphitheater stage and selling the tickets and everything. But last year, in the quiet and the stillness of a dark amphitheater, we turned inward and started asking ourselves, when the amphitheater stage is dark, who are we? You know, and the answer was, we are here to provide transformative experiences of beauty that help connect person to person and person to planet. And the second question, no less important, was, and how can we serve art, artists, and community? And so much of what guided what Spec was doing last year was asking those questions. And as you say, like, how, you know, it's like, I'm okay, like I have my garden, I have my whatever. Now, how can I turn outward and help people who are not okay? And I think that was an incredible thing that we saw, a tremendous amount of generosity of spirit that came out during COVID. And the big question now is, in the race to return to normalcy, whatever that means, that we do not lose that important thrust of where we went. So anyway, Lynn, sorry, I didn't mean to like hijack the conversation there. Like,
well, and I think that what you said about what do we do when we go dark really spoke to Pitney Meadows as well, because we are a community asset and we had to make a decision to protect our staff and protect the community by canceling some of our best asset, which is welcoming people onto the farm. So in thinking about 2020, you know, we pivoted to food security and food donation because we couldn't do education, we couldn't do events, and because we're an asset to the community, we realized that our community needs support with food and as much food donation as possible. So we donated over 23,000 pounds of produce this season. And I think that, you know, in talking to different community members and staff and board, they're like, we never thought we would get to this point. And so I was thinking about, like, you know, how did we not see this path? And we didn't see that path initially because in March we had to go dark as that community asset. And so we had to make a really quick pivot. And so I think that's kind of turned into a strength of the organization is, you know, so what happens when we go dark? And we feed our community, and that's what we did. But you know, in this spring, you know, working at the farm, and I had my head down on my computer and really focused, and someone came into Bill's Gathering Barn and just smiled and said, "Hey, you know, what's going on? What is Pitney Meadows?" And so I was like, you know what? Let's talk. So I showed her the community garden, which we have, and kind of the farm, and explained, you know, we have a farm stand and all that stuff. And so she had just moved up from Texas and kind of wanted to know what we were about. So she was interested in a community garden plot. So she got our last bed, is signed up to volunteer. And it was just like the power of like pausing and looking up and kind of assessing. And I think COVID caused a lot of people to have that pause. And I think for farmers, like it was a little bit of a different experience because, you know, it wasn't that much of a change, you know, as, you know, in spring, COVID hit and people were home a lot more and not socially interacting, but that's kind of typical for farmers. That's when you get really busy and you're really immersed in your work. So it had a very different feel, but I think that people were so attracted to food and being outside and cooking because a lot of their life had been put on pause due to COVID. So, you know, like Pitney Meadows and Spec, when you go dark and certain aspects get put on pause, you get to reflect and think about what's really important. And you realize like community and food. And I think that's why so many people were drawn to, because you don't realize how much you need people until you can't hug them. Yeah. And it is shocking because like some people you're just like, I don't necessarily want to hug everybody, but then when you can't hug anybody, you're just like, I want to hug everybody now, you know, because we crave that. And so I think that like coming together outside and feeling safer and bonding through food and gathering in whichever way we can, I think that, you know, a lot of people had to go dark and reflect. And what shuffled to the surface was food and community.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And again, like, you know, that all of us collectively, you know, thinking about how not to lose that as we kind of, you know, that, you know, tendency that human beings have to want to like just, you know, rush out and go back to the normal. I want to just talk a little bit about, you know, just this sort of elementality of farming and lambing, and you know, it's like, you know, that thing that connects us to the earth. That, like, let's face it, most Americans do not know where their food comes from. You know, they buy food in styrofoam wrapped, you know, containers, and so we lose that sense of preciousness and connectedness to what we're eating and how it got to us. And Lynn, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about just like, I've heard you speak so eloquently about just like that connection to, you know, growing, you know, how you got something out of the earth to then put into your mouth. Like that's a whole huge issue.
Yeah, and I think that kind of valuing food plays into that as well, because I know that like food waste is always an issue, and thinking about composting and everything, and it just kind of it transforms your perspective of food and your relationship to food when you go through like the emotional journey of like growing a carrot, because it's an emotional journey, you know, like you have to, you know, and like even thinking about, you know, an onion, like you seed onions in February and then you plant them and you nurture them, and there's not a harvest until July. So thinking about that relationship of February to July for harvesting that onion, like you value it so much different when you kind of see that process and the work that goes into it and that understanding of what it means to grow your food. So and with like any skill, you know, if you how amazing would it be to, you know, if you want to go for a ride on a boat and you actually built the canoe to go on that ride. Like I've never done that, but I think that would be a very different experience if you've built the boat for that canoe ride. So it's similar of like that connection and that relationship of nurturing a plant that turns into food, and thinking about how you can get the most out of all of the fruits of your labor. So not wasting, you know, it's like even the scraps turn into stock, and really thinking about the difference in flavor, because I mean, some people just haven't experienced a farm carrot and how different that can be, and that relationship and nurturing and seeing it come full circle. So I think that there's kind of a different kind of celebration around food when you participate in growing it.
Well, I've actually, you've spoken so eloquently about, like, when you have engaged in, it's almost, I mean, when you have engaged in the, like, the planting of the seed, the watering, the nurturing, it's like finally harvesting that carrot or whatever it is. We live in such a throwaway society. It's like you go to it's like food comes easy. It's like, you know, trucked in, people don't realize that, when they get an apple in March, like either that apple came from New Zealand or it doesn't taste good because that's not that's not the season for apples, right? And so that we have a tendency to buy a lot of food and like have it in the fridge and then like throw it out when we didn't get to cook it. But you've talked so eloquently about like just the preciousness of like when you're tending that garden with the carrot, there's no way you're going to throw that out. It was such, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, and also just like I love going to like the farmers market and like purchasing the produce that like I just don't like growing. It's just like, oh, that's such like a luxury. Like if I go to purchase like some Brussels sprouts from a local farm, just like this is money so well spent because I have struggled with Brussels sprouts my entire farming career. So really, like having that and also have that understanding and value of like the work that farmers do and really highlighting it. I went to a black tie event one time to represent, the farm I started for the Rodale Institute, and like black tie events are outside of my comfort zone. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna value my work as a farmer as much as like any person in a suit. So I showed up in my fanciest overalls for the event because I was like, you know what, like I think people should be valued whether they're wearing overalls or a suit, and appreciating that work and that skill behind it. So I think that it also is just kind of a value system as well, and really valuing the work of farmers and appreciating it, because like I will happily pay for someone else to grow Brussels sprouts because I know what it means to grow a Brussels sprout, and I've done it wrong plenty of times. So it's a tricky crop. So having that understanding that value of that work and kind of understanding that it's not just toss some seeds and water together. There's a lot of skill and strategy, and even like that onion that you seed in February, like a farmer spends all of November through January thinking about crop plans and making sure that there's the right nutrients and labor and supplies. So like that relationship even starts sooner in like November when doing like crop plans and rotation, managing pests and disease, and especially when you're doing organically, because there's no quick fix. There's no Band-Aid to put on top. There's scouting and making assessments and being very skilled and coming up with all of your plans and then reacting to those plans, reacting to weather. Because there's a lot going against farmers right now of land prices and weather and supplies and access and everything that goes into it. So really supporting local farms and understanding the skill and the risk involved. Farmers take a lot of risk of feeding our community. A lot of people don't get into farming, especially small scale farming of, meat and produce, because they want that profit. It's feeding the community and that satisfaction and everything. So really valuing that work, I think, plays in as well, and the value through experience.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Like, that because our society, we're so removed from the land, and unless you do some gardening and like late farming yourself, you have no idea how complex and how much experience. I mean, as many books as you can read, like you need years and years and years and years and years of understanding like what germinated in what soil at what time with and we don't, as a society, understand the mastery and the artistry truly of of farmers. And Michele, I'm thinking like I'm gonna, so it's one thing to talk about the relationship of human beings to vegetables. And it's an even more intense thing to contemplate our relationship as a consumer disposable society around animal protein, because you go into a supermarket and you see this thing in styrofoam and plastic that doesn't even remotely resemble what had been a living, breathing animal. And Michele, we've had a conversation about that, and I know, I'm sorry, I'm going to throw you into the deep end on that one. So.
Pretend there was a question in there somewhere. But I before I talk about the animal thing, I just want to kind of comment on what Lynn was saying. And, you know, being an artist before moving into the agricultural sphere, prior to starting Craigardan, I was the first executive director of the Essex Farm Institute. And I started to see all of these parallels between artists and farmers. And, you know, what Lynn was just describing about valuing farmers as human beings and as essential as you can get. You know, I started to recognize that within our arts community as well. We often drastically undervalue what artists as individuals contribute to our communities and to society. Yeah. And I think those are two career paths that need to be revered, if not better understood. And I think it starts with the humans. You know, and it's definitely the carrots important, the onions are important, but it starts with the humans doing the work. Yeah. So that was just a really quick connection I was thinking about as Lynn was talking. And then we can easily segue to animals. It also is important to value those carrots, those onions, and those animals.
Right.
And I think what's really striking about, you know, having a farm here in the Adirondacks, I don't know how many of you have taken the hour-and-a-half voyage north to come discover the Adirondack Park, but this is an incredible landscape. This is the jewel of New York State. And as farmers, and a lot of new farmers coming into this region, they're working within a conserved landscape. They are stewards of this land and of this earth. They are setting an incredible example, or I believe they really are feeling this. And those farmers who are still with us in New York, that are third, fourth, fifth generation farmers, they're well aware of the same thing. But they are tasked with making sure that their land will produce those carrots, those onions, and sustain those animals for the next 7 generations. And that is the number one thing that you have to keep in mind when you think about food. It is land conservation. You know, it's human investment in your communities. And those animals that we care for, they are so much a part of the system. You know, the grazing that they're doing is a very intimate relationship with the soil itself. They are, by nurturing the soil, by pasture rotation, by, you know, careful stewardship of that land, we're sequestering carbon. We're raising animals that are going to feed us. We're raising fiber. We're raising, you know, we're producing milk. We have animals that are also working on the land with us. We often employ the work of pigs and goats to actually improve the land around us. Chickens, they're adding fertility back into our soil. And I think one of the strongest disconnects we've had as a society over the last 50 years is in thinking, honestly, this is coming from a 20-year vegetarian, is in thinking that animals should not be a part of the equation, or that they and they often do a lot of damage. But if stewarded properly, animals are really an integral part of the equation of sort of a closed ecosystem within a farm, and can be a really positive influence on a region like the Adirondacks, and integrated into this system.
Yeah. So the thing that pardon me for being obtuse in the way I tossed you the question. Like, I guess to think that, you know, it's really about like each one of us having a sense of responsibility to our fellow community members, our fellow man, to the earth, and to the animal, to other sentient beings. And so where I was going with that is that, most of our society walk into into a grocery store and they buy animal protein, and they don't, whether it's a chicken leg, or, a filet mignon, or scallops, or like shrimp or whatever, you're not thinking about the fact that there was a living life that was taken in order, in order for you to eat. And not to sound too, I don't want to get on my soapbox about it, but I think that, you were talking about how when it's time to take the life of some of the animals that you raise, some of the times with the artists are in residence there, and the experience that they go through witnessing the taking of an animal life in order to feed human beings. I mean, this is not a part of our societal experience anymore. And so we purchase and consume animal protein without any thought to the life that was lost, and that's a rupture of our connection to the cycle of life and our debt to the natural world. So
yeah,
anyway,
absolutely. And the other component of that as well is, yes, we are on a working farm. That means that if you are in residence here during slaughter season, that is what's going on around you. And there are lots of amazing conversations that happen during that time. And we've only had, and this is typically after your full residency experience where you've been eating this food. And then you are here when this takes place. And obviously we do this in a very respectful way, and also respect individuals' opinions around meat and the slaughtering process. But the other component of that is, this is why so many years ago, it feels like now, I felt it was really important to start a culinary residency program. Back when I was thinking about this in 2016 and bringing Craigardan together, I thought, how could you possibly have a working farm with an agricultural program and artists and not have a culinary residency? And I think we were one of the first organizations in the world to actually conceive of this at that time. That's the missing link. If we're not bringing chefs into this equation to understand the value of food, the value of producers, the value of animal life, the care that goes into it, how are they going to translate that in the restaurant? And how are they going to be the ambassadors for that process to each of us when we're in their space, when we're eating food that they're producing? And I think that bringing chefs into the conversation has been a really important missing link in developing exactly what you're talking about, Elizabeth. Getting greater care for each of these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's really great. I mean, I think about somebody like a Dan Barber, Blue Hill, Stone Barns and everything. And, it's for those of you who are interested in these topics, Dan Barber's book, The Third Plate, is so fascinating because, I was at Stone Barns a number of years ago, and they had just been given another tract of a couple hundred acres of what had been, pasture and grazing land and everything. And they had, on the one hand, been spending a lot of time with their, farmers, developing, hybrids of different plants that were more resistant to these extremes of global climate change that we're experiencing, tremendous heat and dryness, and then these massive monsoon storms and everything, and trying to develop different hybrids that will withstand global climate change. But what was interesting was that as they had this new tract of a couple hundred acres, they were saying, okay, we do not use fossil fuel heavy machinery. And so how are we going to break up the soil of this, this tract had been packed down a lot by, grazing, I guess probably mostly cows or whatever. And so they had been simultaneously developing a sunflower that, like a massive sunflower that like 8-foot roots, right? And so it was really fascinating because they were like, okay, well, what the farmers were saying was, let's use these sunflowers with the massively deep roots, which will break up the soil. And Dan Barber's question was, that's great, but in order for it to be economically viable, we have to prove to the chefs and to the restaurant goers that sunflowers can actually be something we want to consume, and i.e., consumers pay for. And it was really fascinating because they had taken these sunflowers into the test kitchen, and the chefs around it, like, they started cutting apart like these foot-long parts of stalks and cut them in half, and they reminded them of bone marrow, because they were thick like this and somewhat hollow, but had this kind of like viscous mass in the middle. And so they created a dish around the sunflowers, which was like a bone marrow, where they took the viscous part in the middle and mixed it with a sunflower seed nut butter and the petals from the flowers to give it a citrus, and then put other herbs and everything, and served it as sunflower bone marrow, right? And it was an incredible dish. But the point is, without that kind of holistic look at what are the farmers doing, what are the chefs doing, and how can that drive a kind of cycle of economic integrity, one piece doesn't work without the other. And it's really fascinating. And it's that kind of work that is just requiring all these really great minds at work. And I'm noticing that it's 7:47, which means that I'm 2 minutes over from sort of signaling our Q&A session. I am just gonna, before we go into Q&A, Lynn and Michele, I want to thank you. You guys just are such inspirations. I feel so privileged to be in a community where the two of you are bringing your intelligence and your dedication and your commitment to bettering our worlds. And I thank you so much for being part of tonight. So, Katrina, you want to dive in?
Yes, I just want to thank you both. It's very inspiring conversation there. So we actually had a lot of questions that have come in. But I think I think we do have a few parents on the line. That what is the best way that we can do to introduce these principles to our children so they can grow up to understand where their food comes from?
Not to plug Pitney Meadows, but come on down to Pitney Meadows and we'll teach you everything you need. It's great because I think that there's a lot of exploration and trial and error that can come to just, there's you're not going to hurt anything by planting a seed. Like it's okay if it doesn't work. It's fine, but like just diving in and seeing what's out there and seeing what's possible, and just diving in. I think it doesn't have to be intimidating, go to the farmer's market, come to Pitney Meadows, ask questions. I think just diving in, what could go wrong, So your kale isn't like as impressive as the farmer's kale. Like it's their full-time job, just try it.
That's a great point, Lynn. And I think I just want to add to that real quick that, getting your kids as young as possible to be on a farm and get their hands in the soil, but also to get them in the kitchen, as part of that closed piece. Grow the kale, even if it's ugly or whatever, and cook it and eat it.
Before we go on, like when the three of us talked a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this thing that, like just everybody's mania for cooking and everything. And that in a way, a lot of times, like our own parents were not they had kind of given up cooking in the era of convenience, but it was our grandparents and beyond. And so returning to that tradition of cooking and passing down traditions over time is something really important. Sorry, go ahead, Drew. Sorry.
No, sorry. Speaking of children, so I think, let's see here. So are there elements of the past year that you would like to continue to keep as we return to normal?
I mean, feeding our neighbors, I would love to keep that up, and thinking about how to increase access to open space and food, and because we're addressing rural populations who are facing food insecurity, and I think that COVID really brought that to light, and that shouldn't be a conversation we stop having because COVID, I think that let's feed our neighbors. Don't forget about your neighbors. Even if it's hard to get them food, they're still gonna need food. Let's figure it out. So never stop talking about feeding your neighbors.
Yeah, and for us, we spent so much of our time thinking about systems work, thinking about systems change. And, that was really the premise for this year's Food Justice Summit. And, programs are so important. Getting food into the bellies of your neighbors is so important. But at the same time, I think collectively, and I'm sure there are a lot of brilliant people in this room right now, we also need to think at the systems level. What do we need to change from the top down at the same time we're working from the bottom up? And it's definitely about food security, but it's also about poverty. It's also about equity. And I think it's definitely about, thinking creatively and thinking again across disciplines to come up with new creative solutions, change and strengthen our systems.
Yeah, and Michele, you had a lot of really great speakers at the Feedback Summit, and I would encourage people to go there for some background and information. And I am also thinking about like the free food fridge program emanating from Albany. I mean, Capital Roots. There are just so many organizations in the Capital Region who are doing incredible work. I mean, I have never felt prouder to be a Capital Region resident than now when I'm seeing all these people standing up and stepping out to do that most important thing, to make sure everyone has access to food. So we'll circulate when we do our post-event email. We'll make sure to send you as many links to resources for that as we possibly can, because they all can use our help, and whether it's financial help or volunteering or whatever, but there are a lot of outlets for help in that area.
That's great. So now I just want to, if anybody does have questions, we're still open for there. I do have a few more here. So, but if you want in the chat box below, you can add those. So how are you guys imagining and planning for the summer of 2021 in terms of COVID? The open-ended.
Like, we don't know. I'm kidding. I think for us, we're reopening our residency program on a very small scale, and using individual artist cabins and artist spaces to still bring people. We have a 340-acre property, so there's plenty of room to be 6 feet apart. But for us, it's also really important to develop a sense of community and a sense of being together. So that's a really hard question. How do you really bring people together and get that kind of bonding and energy when you're trying to really stay apart? So this summer we're welcoming 4 really special artists and residents, and we refer to all of our residents as artists, even if they're here to farm. We have a young farmer joining us for the summer. We have an artist from Morocco coming whose main focus is around the culture of food and how the culinary arts not only tell stories of culture, but they invite the rest of us to understand culture more deeply and allowing us to be more open and be more inclusive. So we have a really incredible artist coming to work within that sphere. And we have we have a potter joining us for the summer, and we also have an installation artist joining us for the summer. And we're just going to be focusing on not only supporting their work and having them become a part of the local community, we're also kicking off our summer with a community farm program here to get hands in the soil and to get people working with animals and, you know, taking home their own eggs and taking home free food, but also learning at the same time, and really empowering people, like Lynn was saying, to just plant that seed in your backyard. So those are our two main focuses this summer.
Yeah, I think for Pitney Meadows Community Farm, we're moving forward, but with whatever we feel safe with. We have the benefit of 166 acres. So like Michele said, like plenty of space and opportunity to gather, but thinking about having, rather than large gatherings, more intimate situations. So we're gonna continue with our food security, but trying to pilot and see how we can increase our impact by piloting some pop-up produce pantries. So bringing the produce to different communities to increase our impact. And then also start to think about really ramping up our education program, because we had to put education on pause in 2019 and 2020. So we hired an education director. So we're going to be planning and collaborating and creating a really solid education program and working on that now, and offering safe events. So, you know, the partnership with SPAC, we've got plenty of other events in the mix as well. So I think continuing to offer safe space is our goal. And you know, we just put in a recreational trail, so people are welcome to come and walk around the farm, get some fresh air, and gather and discuss safely. And you know, one thing that we have CSA members and also community gardeners, and we took a survey to see, you know, if people felt safe and comfortable on the farm. And that was something I was really proud of, is 100% everyone felt safe and comfortable. So I think that we're just going to continue to move forward with that and see how COVID goes and really move forward and plan and gather, but in a safe space and just being cautious. So, you know, not huge, but more intimate gatherings and sparking some conversation.
That's great. I mean, I do want to just touch base on this one question that came through the chat. I do have a couple more. Well, maybe we'll see time-wise. So I think to go back to where we talk about like where our food comes from and that connection with the food, how can we get our community more interested in learning about that?
Well, one great way is to do what Elizabeth's doing with SPAC. You know, I'm really impressed with what, you know, when we first met and she was telling me about this idea about starting a culinary arts program at SPAC, I just thought, that's amazing for such a huge organization with such a long history, to be able to think so differently and so openly around the role of food in the culinary arts within the performing arts landscape and within the natural landscape in which the organization's embedded. And I think that the reach that SPAC has is like no other, and it's incredible. And that opens a lot of doors for conversation. And I think that's going to just, you know, partnering with Pitney Meadows, that's going to open up so many possibilities, you know, both of you working together. I'm so jealous. I wish I was down there. You know,
you are.
Collaboration is key. Collaboration is key. The more we can get people together to work together, I think that's how we're going to change communities.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to just like scoot this like tiny little like personal story into the mix here, that like, I don't know, a number of years ago, I came to this community. I fell in love with Saratoga. I could not believe what an extraordinary place this was, with such an ethos. And just so happened that a couple years into it, I was confronting one of those big zero dominant birthdays. And I was trying to think, like, how do I really want to celebrate a birthday like this? And I really wanted to thank some of the, you know, community, like my friends in the community who had been so supportive. But I also wanted to celebrate the things that I love the most. Obviously the arts, food, and nature, which are like, for me, like nature is first and foremost, the, you know, the kind of guiding light in my life. And so I was like, how do I do this? And somebody said, talk to Kim Klopstock. And so I went, and I had met Kim before, but we sat and we talked, and I said, I want to do a dinner. I want to do an event, and I want to create something where people can enjoy each other's company, but also I want it to have something to do. It was in the spring. It's my birthday is in the spring, and so I wanted the theme to be forest magic, because this is that time of year when like foraging and like the life force coming up, and so anyway, this is, you know, I just threw all these ideas out to Kim, and she created this unbelievable, like life altering moment in my life, and to be able to bring people together in this really extraordinary way. And so that was kind of the genesis of culinary arts at SPAC, because people think about often people think about food as like, oh, I'm ordering that dish from that menu. And that's not what it's about. It's like what Kim created was the ultimate definition of art, where she used her skill and her imagination to create something that connected people through emotion and beauty and creativity, you know? And so in that moment, in a way, like culinary arts at SPAC was born. Kim has been one of our great muses in this whole journey. And I would just, you know, I just like thank Kim for that incredible inspiration. But I think the answer to your question is that we all have to work together, like every single one of us, to remind each other of how intimately we are connected through soil and plants and animals, and through our own expression, and how we treat each other and how we experience the world. So I'm seeing that it's 8:02, and probably you're gonna like pull the curtain across.
No.
So thank you, and to the junior committee, Lynn and Michelle, it's always such an incredible privilege to spend time with you. Thanks to all of you who dialed in tonight, and to all of you who ordered food from the Lily and the Rose. Love you guys. Thank you so much for the support and inspiration. Till next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.